My guest at this time is Phil Kerpen. He's president of American Commitment. If you heard the first part of our interview, you know that Mr. Kerpen is sounding the alarm about the supposedly reasonable approach to reforming healthcare known as the public option. We obviously invite you to go back and listen to that part of our conversation. But Mr. Kerpen's essential point is that public option will eventually lead to single payer, and probably sooner rather than later. But as the Democrats push forward with their ideas, it once again reminds us that Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House as recently as 2017 and 2018, yet they couldn't pass any substantial legislation to reverse Obamacare other than the provision in the tax bill to repeal the individual mandate. So why didn't they? Why did it seem they were caught flat-footed at having this power after explaining for 7 years what they would do if they had the chance to deal with Obamacare? Here's what Mr. Kerpen had to say.
You know, I think the problem was that we thought we had basic agreement around the bill that President Obama had vetoed, and there was sort of this proven track. We knew that it would work as a legislative procedural matter under the Senate rules to get that bill through. It had been done, it had been put on a president's desk, and it had been vetoed. And the idea, the thinking was, when there's a Republican president, we'll pass the exact same bill, put it on the president's desk, get that signed, and then we'll sort of let the chips fall where they may and sort of sort things out after that. But the repeal part will be done, and we'll have delivered on that promise. And I think that the reason that didn't work in practice is there were a large number of senators, a considerable number of senators, who were perfectly happy to pass a repeal bill that they knew would be vetoed, but were uncomfortable politically passing one that would actually be signed into law. For whatever reason, you could say they were dishonest. You could say that they became, more contemplative. That whatever. Depending on your opinion of that matter, you could describe it in different ways. But the bottom line was the track that leadership thought we were on, which was pass the same bill again, get repeal done, then sort things out, became untenable. There weren't enough votes for it, and it became clear they were going to have to try to do a replacement at the same time. And the whole thing just sort of collapsed of its own weight because there's so many different views on how to handle the replacement. And in the interim, Democrats had been extraordinarily successful with their media allies at really, really blowing up the scope of the pre-existing condition issue, which really only affects a few 100,000 people. But they had led people to believe that it affected millions and millions of people, and it therefore became hugely politically sensitive. And it's hard to repeal sort of the core regulatory, the core regulations of Obamacare and still, provide coverage for pre-existing conditions. And a lot of the debate became about how do you do that as a mechanical matter. And, they barely got something through the House. They weren't able to get it through the Senate. But, Greg, even with all of that and with all of the internal difficulties and so forth, it was only one vote away. And McCain changed his mind at the last minute, and that's why sort of that skinny version of repeal, which would have been more like the original strategy, why that failed. And then again, that was in, I think, July of 2017, and they regrouped. And in September, they were in a position where it was going to come down to Rand Paul, and he was saying he was a no on the block grant bill, the Lindsey Graham bill. He was saying he was a no, but I kind of feel if they'd forced him to it, he would have ended up voting yes, if for no other reason than the bill also had defunding of Planned Parenthood in it. But we'll never know because Thad Cochran missed the vote. He was stuck in Mississippi in a hospital and was medically absent. And so this failed twice by a single vote. So it was very close to happening in different forms. It's not that we were miles away and that they were totally unprepared. But the original strategy that everyone kind of thought would go, there was too much hesitation. There were people who didn't want to do it, and they had to regroup. And by the time they were ready to move, they just fell short twice by a single vote. And so it was close. But I think the key takeaway from that last failed effort that failed by a single vote in September of 2017 is that the block grant approach really can unify everyone because you've got so many people with so many different ideas, but if you can tell them, hey, you'll have an opportunity to find a state that wants to try it your way, and we'll find out which works instead of trying to move the whole country, in a single direction. I think it creates a lot more opportunity to try different things and see what works. And so I think, especially with the with the experience that we had with aid to families with dependent children being replaced with a block grant in the 90s being so successful, I think that approach sort of it appealed to sort of familiar muscle memory for Republicans and conservatives. And I really believe that had Thad Cochran not been medically absent, Rand Paul would have changed his position and that bill would have passed. And it's been refined significantly since then. It's a much stronger bill than it was even at that time. And so I believe that if President Trump is reelected and we have a Republican House, the Republicans take the House back, that something like that, a better developed version of that block grant approach will pass. And it'll give us an opportunity to fix health care in some states. And, I know that's not a lot of comfort to some of your listeners in places that are controlled by liberals, but I think that over time, we'll be able to show the way and create models that actually work and then expand them from those states outward.
Phil, thanks again very much for your time today.
My pleasure, Greg. Have a good one.
Thank you, sir. Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.